their endorsement. And that is why former Justice John Paul Stevens took the extraordinary step of saying that Judge Kavanaugh is not fit to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Mr. President, it didn't have to be this way. The process was flawed from the start, and it got worse as time went on.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
It started when President Trump contracted out the process
You guys are doing good
of picking
this
a
day.
Supreme Court nominee to right-wing groups like the Federalist Society,
What you guys
like the Heritage
heard
Foundation.
before
During his
stream
campaign,
started
candidate Trump
was
said he was going to pick
My
Supreme
God
Court
is the Sun
nominees
by Queens of the Stone
based
Age
not on who would be impartial, based not on who would be
from their album
independent,
Like
but
Clockwork,
based on who would
which came
do
out
his bidding on certain issues.
like a year or two
He had
ago.
a number of litmus tests.
So
For example,
I was
during the campaign,
going to listen to some vaporwave stuff, but I heard that the Kavanaugh thing is going on right now. Would you guys prefer to listen to that, or would you rather just like listen to music and shit? Because I'm good with whatever. Because I know this like the thing about the Kavanaugh thing is like I'm really interested, but Jesus, you know, it could like be for God knows how long. Until we like get to a resolution. So as an aside though, I'm a huge fan of Queens of the Stone Age. I love Queens of the Stone Age. It's like one of my favorite bands right now. So yeah, and I hadn't listened to them in a bit, so I was like, oh, let's check out some of that shit. I have to go out and get my beer just in case. Yeah, we should all drink beer in celebration if he gets confirmed.
You have one. You have a single beer.
I have one beer in the fridge. That's right. I'm not sure if it's what his brand is though. All right. How do you feel about Villains? I'll link you to the new album. I'll look it up. I may have heard some tracks on it actually, but yeah, I like them. I hope I never have to hear like Josh Homme's like political views. I know he's, you know, like you just don't want to do that because it kind of ruins them for you, and you know that most of the time when it comes to artists, they're gonna like let you down. So, we could be together when the future of due process is decided in our country, but it's your call. Yeah, if I play it, I probably won't say much. You know, because I'm going to be listening. So, is that alright with you guys? Because I'd rather just listen while I'm doing this. But the thing is, I don't know how long this is going to go for. Because, you know, this dude is talking right now. And, you know... All right, let's start working on this thing. I may be doing some of this. Hey, Davey, how you doing, man? Dudes talking is not kosher. Let's see the brush. Okay, so let's do that. I'm gonna play the Kavanaugh thing and just paint. I think it'll be the most unique Kavanaugh stream ever. And if there's something that happens that I need to comment on, I'll say something.
It's no longer settled. In fact, Judge Kavanaugh, before he was judge, said himself in a 2003 memo, which came to light, quote, "I am not sure that all legal scholars refer to Roe as settled law of the land at the Supreme Court level, since the court can always overrule its precedent." A clear indication of where Judge Kavanaugh's reasoning lies, especially in light of the testimony from his own law clerks. If you look at other parts of his record, you'll find that Judge Kavanaugh consistently rules in favor of powerful special interests and against the public interest. He has sided with those who want to lift all the restrictions on political campaign expenditures. In one opinion, Judge Kavanaugh wrote that PACs are constitutionally entitled to raise and spend unlimited money in support of candidates for elected office because it was, quote, implausible, unquote, that contributions from independent groups could corrupt candidates. Those million-dollar expenditures on behalf of candidates, they have no impact on the thinking of that candidate once they're elected, according to Judge Kavanaugh, of course, according to the Citizens United decision. In fact, Judge Kavanaugh has been credited by one campaign finance expert as, quote, the man who created the super PAC, unquote. Judge Kavanaugh has gone farther. He's even suggested that limits on direct contributions to candidates are unconstitutional. Back in March 2002, in an email, he said, quote, I've heard very few people say that the limits on contributions to candidates are unconstitutional, although I, for one, tend to think those limits have some constitutional problems. So we can see that if it's Justice Kavanaugh, not only will he double down on Citizens United, which says that corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money, including unlimited amounts of secret money, but he questions the constitutionality of putting limits not only on independent expenditures, but on direct contributions to candidates. We know Judge Kavanaugh was also the pick for those who want corporate power to trump workers' rights, consumer rights, and environmental protections. The day that Judge Kavanaugh was nominated for the Supreme Court, the White House circulated a letter to corporate leaders touting the fact that he would protect their interests. The White House proudly noted that he has overruled federal regulators 75 times on cases involving clean air, consumer protections, net neutrality, and other issues. When it comes to workers' rights, Judge Kavanaugh has routinely sided with corporations who want to prevent workers from unionizing. Even at President Trump's own hotel in Atlantic City, which at the time had admitted its refusal to bargain with workers in a 2012 case. When the car dealers across several hotels voted to unionize, Judge Kavanaugh and a panel of judges invalidated the will of the workers, overturned an administrative law judge's ruling that the union be certified, and allowed the Trump Hotel to continue violating workers' rights. On environmental issues, Judge Kavanaugh's record shows that time and again he favors polluters over clean water and clean air. With his confirmation, it will be much harder for Americans to seek redress in the courts, and it will be easier for polluters to continue to pollute the environment. As a circuit court judge, he has written 10 dissenting opinions in environmental cases, and in each one, he argued against the side that sought to protect the public health and the environment. Mr. President, Judge Kavanaugh's sweeping view of executive power should cause alarm among every member of this Senate, Republican and Democrat alike. We've all heard the testimony, we've seen the writings, and it appears to be no surprise that President Trump, who is watching that Mueller investigation get closer and closer to his doorstep, that he would want a judge that gives excessive deference to the executive branch. Somebody who may be on the Supreme Court when that court has to decide whether or not President Trump can be subpoenaed in that case or otherwise brought to justice in that case, if that's what the conclusions demand. So, Mr. President, it's clear on all of these issues that President Trump and Republicans had their man in Judge Kavanaugh. They have someone who they believe will overturn the Affordable Care Act, once again giving insurance companies a green light to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. They think they've got someone who will overturn Roe v. Wade or dramatically limit a woman's right to reproductive freedom and choice. Someone who will gut environmental regulations, undermine workers' rights and consumer protections, and someone who will give corporations the ability to continue to spend unlimited amounts of money in elections, and who might even argue that the contribution limits to candidates are unconstitutional and can be limited. And finally, someone who the president believes will get him off the hook if the Mueller investigation gets too close to him. So, Mr. President, here we have Republicans in this Senate and a president on the verge of getting someone who they thought could do all those things. And then something unexpected happened. The country learned about what happened to Dr. Ford.
Here we
Republican
fucking go.
colleagues seem to have forgotten that Dr. Ford did not want to come forward publicly to report her sexual assault. It was only when she found out that Judge Kavanaugh was on the second short list that was released that she became concerned. Even then, she didn't want to come forward publicly, but she thought it was her civic duty to let people know what had happened to her. And so she reached out to her representative in Congress on a confidential basis. The story did become public. And when it did, she felt duty-bound to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee and tell senators what happened to her on that awful day. We all know she had nothing to gain. She has been subjected to all sorts of awful death threats and other kinds of verbal abuse. Nothing to gain, everything to lose. And our Republican senators who listened to her testimony, for the most part, said that her testimony was both powerful and credible. We know she answered questions directly. By contrast, Judge Kavanaugh's testimony was partisan, it was evasive, and on many points, even under oath, untruthful. When the female prosecutor that Republicans hired to ask questions for them could not discredit Dr. Ford's testimony, we saw many of our Republican colleagues launch into full partisan attack mode. No longer did the facts matter. They picked up on Judge Kavanaugh's opening statement about partisanship rather than seeking to get to the truth about what happened to Dr. Ford and others who have alleged sexual assault. What mattered was ramming through their nominee. The majority leader, Senator McConnell, said, quote, "They'll plow right through," unquote. And by God, nothing was going to stop them. They even scheduled the vote on Judge Kavanaugh before they had heard the testimony about sexual abuse and sexual assault from Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. It was only when Senator Flake recognized what a sham the process was that he at least forced the Republican leadership to do what they did not want to do.
Sham, that's not your word.
And
that's
agreed
Lindsey
to a
Graham's
short
word. Can't say
FBI
sham.
investigations into the allegations of Dr. Ford and Deborah Ramirez. But the goal never changed. The goal of ramming through the nomination never changed. And that's why Senate Republicans in the White House dramatically limited the scope of the FBI investigation. They tied the hands of the FBI. They told the FBI who they could interview. An investigation that was already going to be short at about a week was cut even shorter and was finished up in a matter of days. And what's the result, Mr. President? The result is completely predictable. The result is we have lots of key witnesses that say they have corroborating evidence to support the allegations of Dr. Ford and Deborah Ramirez, who were not interviewed. And the country will continue to hear from these witnesses after today's vote, because the investigation was orchestrated by the White House and the Senate Republican leadership. The FBI was not allowed to do its full job. Mr. President, it would have been better for all parties involved, and I mean all parties, including Judge Kavanaugh, to have had a thorough investigation where at the end of the day, the public could have confidence that all the available evidence had been tracked down and reviewed. That would have been best for the integrity of the court and the integrity of the Senate. And we all know there's no requirement that we rush this confirmation. We all know that. After all, it was the Republican leader who kept a seat open on the Supreme Court for months and months and months after President Obama had nominated Judge Merrick Garland. So this notion that there's some kind of artificial deadline is simply untrue. This is all being done to do, as the majority leader said, plow right through. Because taking time to do the investigation right would have put the entire enterprise at risk, the entire plan to put on the Supreme Court the person who President Trump and Republicans believe will deliver the legal outcomes they want. Even if all the testimony shows he can no longer be impartial, his record and testimony indicate that they will deliver the legal outcomes they want in this case. Now, Mr. President, Dr. Ford's courage in coming forward to tell us what happened to her has empowered many of my Maryland constituents and many others around the country to come forward with their own stories of abuse. I have received written statements from over 50 Marylanders, telling me about the sexual abuse they had encountered. Some of them told me they had shared with me what they have not shared with their own family members. They felt it was important that I know why they did not report their abuse at the time, why they did not tell their parents, why their memories were not perfect decades later. They told me what they do remember. They told me they remember the clothing they wore the day they were assaulted. They tell me they remember the scent, the cologne, the feeling.
Guys, memory is unreliable. Hands. That's why we have to believe women.
Those memories haunt them. These stories are reminders of how our society has let down survivors of sexual assault for decades. The way that these survivors have been treated has been shameful. I'm humbled by the trust they have shown to share these experiences with me, and I will let the stories of a few of them speak for themselves here on the floor of the Senate. Here's what one woman wrote, quote, "Once,
brother, can we please stop?
When I was 16, I was at a party. There was alcohol. He was popular. I wasn't. He was big and strong. I have never been. He threatened me afterwards. He needn't have bothered. He told me no one would believe me. He told me I wanted it. I showed a friend the bruises. He said everyone would say I was a slut. I told another friend I was frightened. She said I should just avoid him in school. I told an adult I trusted at my job. She told me about how when she reported when she was young, how the police treated her, how her parents reacted, how she regretted saying anything. I never told my parents. I went to a free clinic, and the therapist asked, How could I know it was rape if I had been drinking? Those are the powerful words from one Marylander. Another
It's a good question,
wrote,
though.
quote, I remember the assault vividly. I was on my way home from church. I don't remember the sermon before. Details are fuzzy, but I remember the assault. I remember looking at a nearby home where I knew elderly people lived. I could see that their TV was on, and I wondered, would they even hear me scream? I didn't tell people. I didn't think people would believe me. End of quote. Another constituent wrote me this quickly, without editing. She told me she cried when she read it to her husband. Here's what she wrote, quote, having experience in working with victims in a prosecutorial manner or as a judge, or even defending the accused does not make you
I think this guy's
an
gonna
expert.
filibuster.
The expert
Is he gonna filibuster?
is the victim.
He could just do this for like the whole
I am that
day to
victim.
push this thing back.
I am that expert. And as such, I can tell you absolutely, without hesitation, that what haunts you most, what affects how you relate in the future with your loving spouse, what affects how you feel about yourself, and what affects even your sense of smell, is the memory of the person who abused you. Not the address where it took place, not the time on the clock, not the day of the week, but the smell of the person assaulting you, the feel of their hands, the confusion in your head, because you don't know what's happening, because it's all happening so fast. And yes, their name. You never forget their name. She went on to say, quote, then comes the shame. What did I do to cause this? What will people think of me now because I've been touched? I've been tarnished. Will I be believed? At this point, my life has already been altered beyond repair, but it's an internal alter. If I talk, it alters my external world as well. Maybe it's better to just not talk, because then at least I can pretend things are as they have always been. I can just pretend that I'm exactly the same person, but I'm not. End of that passage. Another wrote that she understood that a man could move on from assaulting a woman, particularly if they were drunk at the time. She said, and I quote, the man who assaulted me later acted as if he was catching up with an old friend and had no memory of the event. I have several friends who have experienced the same thing. End quote. Another echoed a similar experience, writing, quote, he had been drinking heavily with friends at a restaurant or bar. I had not. Later that night, he raped me. He was very inebriated and displayed a complete personality change. He was violent and angry and did not even seem to see me. I was paralyzed and probably saved my own life by not fighting back, as he had essentially become a rabid animal. The next day, I confronted him about what had happened, and he had no memory of the crime he committed. End quote. Mr. President, these are not isolated incidents for survivors. As I said, I've gotten over 50 personal testimonials from survivors since Dr. Ford had the courage to come forward. People who have not shared what happened to them with some of their closest friends or family members. These are stains etched in their memories. Many of them, as I said, never told a soul. Others were ignored or dismissed when they brought these awful experiences up. They were told to stay quiet. Mr. President, it's an insult to these survivors when some have called them partisan. And in many cases, they went out of their way in their messages to me to say that their concern had nothing to do with ideology or partisanship. Nothing. Some told me they're Republicans. Others are independents. Some of them grew up at the time were in families that had no care about politics. Others told me they were Democrats, but they'd be more than willing to accept a different conservative judge, but not this one. Mr. President, when Donald Trump went to a campaign rally and mocked Dr. Ford, he mocked every one of those 50 survivors who wrote to me. He mocked every survivor of sexual abuse around the country. And this Senate's decision to do, as the majority leader said, quote, plow right through without undertaking a thorough and serious investigation into the charges from Dr. Ford, Deborah Ramirez, that also disrespects these survivors. That's what they say to me. And of course, Judge Kavanaugh did the same thing in his opening statement at his most recent hearing, because his entire opening statement suggested that Dr. Ford's coming forward was part of some political conspiracy. And unfortunately, that's where this conversation has gone ever since. Not an effort to really get to the truth, to really get all the facts, but just to do what the majority leader said before she even testified: plow right through. Mr. President, we know that etched above the Supreme Court are the words equal justice under law. It does not say plow right through.
This music is actually kind of perfect, isn't it? Like, this could be a now this.
The decision to plow right through, will undermine and haunt the integrity of the Supreme Court for decades to come. And it will also haunt and undermine the integrity of this United States Senate. I yield the floor.
Whew, that was cancer. Woo, Jesus. Let's see what they do next. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I have a feeling that they're gonna try to filibuster. I don't know why I can't shake this. Like, they're gonna try to just, like, do these, like, long-ass fucking dramatic-ass Lifetime TV speeches about caring about women, and they're just gonna drag this out. They're just gonna drag it out. And it's not actually gonna get settled today. Plow right through. Yeah, plow right through music. Sounds like a scene from Silver Bullet. Oof, the musical. I love it. That's fucking fantastic. Oof.
Mr. President?
Oh shit, here we go.
Mr. President, I have to say, I am sick of this. I am sick of everyone who wants to rewrite the history of what happened in the Senate with the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. It isn't even over yet, and they want people to believe that what we've witnessed over the past weeks was what they call a political hit job perpetrated by Democrats with a grudge. That's the story the nominee himself tried to sell in his testimony on Thursday. He accused Democrats of lying in wait. He twisted Ranking Member Feinstein's respect for Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's wish
just lying.
for privacy. He falsely claimed that Democrats had her accusation ready, that Dr. Ford's accusation was held in secret for weeks because the Democrats, as Judge Kavanaugh put it, couldn't take me out on the merits. What a paranoid fantasy. Brett Kavanaugh's entire performance was an hours-long rant. I'm quoting him. He said, "This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups." End quote. Unbelievable, in my view. He claimed to have written the screed on his own without showing it to any of his handlers. I find that hard to believe, given that he was reported to have spent 10-hour days at the White House preparing for this hearing. We heard Dr. Ford's raw and sincere account of that night as a drunk teenage Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge attacked her. The nominee called it a grotesque and coordinated character assassination. But this isn't a conspiracy, Judge Kavanaugh. It's reality. Look at what Dr. Ford's coming forward has triggered.
A conspiracy, it's reality? What?
Her recall of the events is consistent
What does that
with the way
mean?
survivors of trauma remember things. Her demeanor was forthright and open. She had everything to lose and nothing to gain by coming forward. And despite what many are saying, there are quite a bit of collaboration of her story. She knew Brett Kavanaugh. She socialized with his circle of friends. She had told people in her life what happened to her long before Brett Kavanaugh was nominated to the Supreme Court. His calendars attest to his having attended at least one gathering consistent with her recollection. But another reason so many people believe Dr. Ford is that her account is so familiar. It has echoes in so many of our own stories, our own experiences. So many women have survived some version of what happened to her, along a spectrum of experiences that range from creepy looks or catcalls to rape and other violent attacks. So many women have kept their stories to themselves for fear of not being believed, for fear of retaliation or humiliation or shunning. In a column written by Monica Hess in the Washington Post entitled, "Dear Dads, your daughters told me about their assaults. This is why they never told you." Ms. Hess writes about all the reasons why survivors don't even tell the people closest to them about what happened to them. She writes, quote, "For all the stereotypes that linger about women being too
Monica
fragile
Hess
or emotional,
also wrote something
these past
called,
weeks have revealed what many women already know.
Boys will be boys. Why hashtag all men
effort
should
goes
be
into protecting
offended
men
by
we
the
love
latest
from
Kavanaugh
bad
defenders.
things that happen to us."
And
unquote. She writes to fathers who are only now finding out about the daily
what else did she
indignities
put?
women endure, and explains why they were never told
The
or
New
why
Miss
their loved
America
ones
and the Trap of
were now
Ladylike
writing to
Expectations.
Hess herself.
What?
I am going to quote extensively from Miss.
She also
Hess's
wrote a
article.
piece called "Was Their Child a Boy or a
To the
Girl?"
father of the
Naya's
young
parents
woman
wanted
who was
to let
assaulted
Naya
by the student
decide.
athlete she was
We don't
hired
want to pressure
tutor.
anybody into
She never
gender
told you because
stereotypes.
she didn't want to break your heart, but she told me in a long email because the memory of it was breaking her own heart, and she spent 5 years replaying it. To the father of the junior high student who was pinned down and undressed at a gathering 30 years ago, she didn't tell you because she didn't want to see you cry, but she told me that she still remembers every detail. To the father of the teenager who was raped at a party, you don't know about this because she was certain that if you knew, you would kill her attacker and go to prison, and it would be her fault. To the father of the son who was assaulted by an older man, I wish I could tell you more about what happened to him, but he wouldn't tell me, and he definitely won't tell you because manliness is important to you, he says. To all the fathers of all the silent victims, your children are quietly carrying these stories, not because they can't handle their emotions, but because they are worried that you can't. They're worried that your emotions will have too many consequences, or they fear you won't think of them the same way, or that you'll be distraught because you didn't protect them. end quote. These words and stories are powerful, and Ms. Hess is right. So many survivors want to protect their loved ones, but Ms. Hess is also right that they shouldn't keep their stories in. She urges them, saying, and again I quote, "So to the rest of you, if you can tell your father in a way that feels safe, in a way that would bring you comfort, tell your father, tell your brothers, let them be uncomfortable, let them share some of your pain. Don't let them be ignorant." End quote. And once women are able to share their experiences, what should we do with them? I agree with the author, Rebecca Traister, who captured so much of what I've been thinking lately in a piece called "Fury is a Political Weapon and Women Need to Wield It" in the New York Times. I want to read some of it to you. Ms. Traister wrote, quote, "Outside the room where Christine Blasey Ford was testifying on Thursday morning, women were incandescent with rage and sorrow and horror. They were getting angry in a new way, a public way, an unapologetic way, a way that is typically reserved for men and that would again serve men well when afternoon came. Brett Kavanaugh bellowed, he snarled, he pouted, and wept furiously at the injustice of having his ascendance to power interrupted by accusations of sexual assault. He challenged his questioners, turned their queries back on them. What happened inside the room was an exceptionally clear distillation of who has historically been allowed to be angry on their own behalf and who has not. And outside the room was a hint of how it might be changing. Most of the time, female anger is discouraged, repressed, ignored, swallowed, or transformed into something more palatable and less recognizable as fury, something like tears. When women
this
are truly
woman's
vivid,
insane, but if this woman
maybe we cry
starts talking
when
about
we're furious,
representations in movie and female stereotypes in fucking movies, I'm gonna lose my shit.
No, we can't. Maybe we're just sad about the very same things that we're angry about. I wept as soon as Dr. Blasey began to speak. On social media, I saw hundreds of messages from women who reported the same experience of finding themselves awash in tears simply in response to this woman's voice raised in polite dissent. The power of the moment, the anxiety that it would be futile, the grief that we even had to put her and ourselves through this spectacle was intense. Tears are permitted as an outlet for wrath, in part because they are fundamentally misunderstood. One of my sharpest memories from an early job in a male-dominated office where I once found myself weeping with an inexpressible rage was my being grabbed by the scruff of my neck by an older woman, a chilly manager of whom I'd always been slightly terrified, who dragged me into a stairwell. "Never let them see you crying," she told me. "They don't know you're furious. They think you're sad and will be pleased because they got to you." This political moment has provoked a period in which more and more women have been in no mood to dress their fury up as anything other than raw and burning rage. Many women are yelling, shouting, using Sharpies to etch sharply worded slogans onto protest signs, making furious phone calls to representatives. Many of the women shouting now are women who have not previously yelled publicly before. Many of them white middle-class women newly awakened to political fury and protest. Part of the process of becoming mad must be recognizing that they are not the first to be furious and that there is much to learn from the stories and histories of the livid women, many of them not white or middle class, who have never had reason not to be mad. If you are angry today, or if you have been angry for a while,
on the intersectionality,
and you wonder whether you're allowed to be as angry as you feel, let me say, yes, you are allowed. You are, in fact, compelled. If you've been feeling a new rage at the flaws of this country, and if your anger is making you want to change your life in order to change the world, then I have something incredibly important to say. Don't forget how this feels, end quote. That's Rebecca Traister's article. Tracer ends her article by endorsing anger and telling women not to let go of it. She says, what you're angry about now, injustice, will still exist, even if you yourself are not experiencing it or are tempted to stop thinking about how you experience it and how you contribute to it. Others are still experiencing it, still mad. Some of them are mad at you. Don't forget them. Don't write off their anger. Stay mad for them, alongside them. Let them lead you in anger, end quote. That's what I am left with, Mr. President. Anger, fury, disgust at a process that could not see the truth of what Dr. Ford tried to tell us. The rewriters of truth are already at it, in column after column, on cable's news shows across the country. Even here on the Senate floor, they are casting Judge Kavanaugh as the victim. I was asked a few days ago whether the 4 Democratic women on the Judiciary Committee had a special responsibility to address the question of sexual assault. I reject the premise of that question. It's not just up to the women in this country to stand up. Men have to join us. They have to hold themselves and other men accountable. They have to push back against the fear that those with power feel when they are challenged. And we saw some of the ways that this kind of fear operates just this week among some of my Senate colleagues. When approached by survivors of sexual assault who waited to talk to them about the Kavanaugh nomination, they said things like, grow up, and insinuating that the women sharing their painful, traumatic accounts were there to enjoy themselves. Enjoy themselves? We saw the President of the United States sink to a level I didn't think possible. The mocker-in-chief mocked Dr. Ford, a survivor of sexual assault. He mocked her for not remembering some peripheral things about the attack. But the thing she said she was 100% sure of was that it was Brett Kavanaugh who attacked her. In case some of my colleagues don't get it, sexual assault survivors often don't remember how many steps, how many rooms, the kinds of things the president mocked Dr. Ford about. But they remember the attack itself with 100% accuracy. They remember how it felt.
Fuck off.
The fear.
If
the
you don't remember the details, how can the fuck we know you're not lying?
The kinds of insults that have been hurled at Dr. Ford and others in her situation are cruel and unnecessary. Mr. President, I'm left with anger and determination, just like millions of people across the country. I will take Rebecca Tracer's advice and commend it to the women of America and the men who understand their stories. I will stay mad and let that anger propel us to change. Going forward,
stay mad, bitch.
I will continue to listen to women who have shared their stories. I will tell them I hear them, that I see them, and that I want all of us to be the change that needs to happen in our country. Mr. President, before I yield the floor, I want to read a statement from Debbie Ramirez, dated October 6, 2018. And she says, 35 years ago, the other students in the room chose to laugh and look the other way as sexual violence was perpetuated on me by Brett Kavanaugh. As I watch many of the senators speak and vote on the floor of the Senate, I feel like I'm right back at Yale, where half the room is laughing and looking the other way. Only this time, instead of drunk college kids, it is you as senators who are deliberately ignoring his behavior. This is how victims are isolated and silenced. But I do have corroborating witnesses speaking for me, although they were not allowed to speak to the FBI, and I feel extremely grateful for them and for the overwhelming amount of support that I have received and continue to receive during this extremely difficult and painful time. There may be people with power who are looking the other way, but there are millions more who are standing together, speaking up about personal experiences of sexual violence and taking action to support survivors. This is truly a collective moment of survivors and allies standing together. Thank you for hearing me, seeing me, and believing me. I am grateful for each and every one of you. We will not be silenced. We stand in truth and light. Debbie Ramirez. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, one, I thank the distinguished senator from Hawaii for
her comments. She has had a strong voice of reason and conscience throughout this whole debate. President, this is not a normal confirmation vote. I've now served in the Senate for 19 Supreme Court nominations, more than any other senator. I've never seen so much at stake with a single seat. And I've never seen this much at stake precisely because this is about more than one seat. Indeed, the integrity of two of the three co-equal branches of our republic is at stake. This vote will decide whether the United States Senate, which at its best can serve as the conscience of the nation, causes the Supreme Court to be indelibly tainted in the eyes of millions of Americans, perhaps more than half the country. And to be clear, my opposition to Judge Kavanaugh is not because he was nominated by a Republican president. In my 44 years in the Senate, I have voted for more Republican-appointed judges than almost every single Republican senator serving today. And that includes, of course, voting to confirm
who cares?
Chief Justice John Roberts. But Judge Kavanaugh is not a typical conservative nominee. My opposition is driven by my firm belief that his confirmation will bring great harm to the court and to this body and to millions of hardworking Americans. Judge Kavanaugh has been relentlessly dishonest under oath. I'm not just referring to the fact that he's not telling the truth about his high school drinking or the obvious misogyny in his yearbook or whether he's Bartle Kavanaugh who passed out from drunkenness. All of that, of course, does speak to his credibility as he concocted far-fetched story after far-fetched story, all to avoid conceding facts that would corroborate the Brett Kavanaugh as described by Dr. Ford and Ms. Ramirez. But it's much more than that, much more than that. Every single time Judge Kavanaugh has testified before the Senate, in 2004, in 2006, twice in 2018, he's misled, he's dissembled. On issues both big and small, anytime he's been faced with questions that are incriminating,
on Golden Graham, who is this fossil?
In the middle of a controversy, he's shown he cannot be trusted to tell the truth. He misled the Senate following questions by both Republicans and Democrats. He misled the Senate about his role in a hacking scandal and thefts from the United States Senate. He misled the Senate about his role in confirming several controversial judicial nominees and in shaping the legal justifications
Guy's way past boomer
for some of the Bush administration's most extreme and eventually discredited policies. I've never seen
Does he even know how to use the
so
internet?
Casually willing to evade and deny the truth in service of his own raw ambition. For decades, that ambition has led him step after step evade the truth if it's in any way going to stop his ambitions. And the truth is, we're just beginning to learn about Judge Kavanaugh's dishonesty under oath. His false testimony during his 2004 and 2006 confirmation hearings only came to light as the Judiciary Committee obtained some of his White House emails. Some, because Senate Republicans blocked access to 90% of his White House record. I compare that to when Justice Kagan was here. We made sure the Republicans and Democrats had 99% of her record and briefed on the remaining 1%. Here, 90% was blocked. So everything we've learned about his prior dishonesty comes from just 10% of his record. Now, many more of these records are eventually going to become public after today. In fact, I joined a lawsuit led by Senator Blumenthal to force the National Archives to release these records. So if 10% of his records show dishonesty, what are the chances that the other 90% do not contain additional evidence of Judge Kavanaugh's dishonesty under oath? I say the chances are about 0. And it's not just Judge Kavanaugh's veracity that's disqualifying. It's also his temperament, his partisan zeal. When Brett Kavanaugh was nominated to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2004, he was known only as a hyper-partisan political operative. Because he was seen as so hyper-political, it took 2 years to get him confirmed. And since Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court, I'd wondered whether his earlier partisan zeal that held him up for 2 years, whether that has remained. Well, it was confirmed last week that it does remain. I have never seen a nominee of either Republican or Democrat so consumed by partisan rancor. In testimony that veered into a tirade, he angrily
I've been here
senators,
for 30,000 years and I've never seen it
smear
ever.
Campaign to ruin his name and sink his nomination. His conspiratorial ramblings, attributing the allegations to revenge on behalf of the Clintons, wherever that came from, were an insult to Dr. Ford and to survivors of sexual violence everywhere. It's not helped that his patron, the President of the United States, continues to deride victims of sexual violence. Former Justice John Paul Stevens, a Republican appointee, actually the first nominee I was able to vote on as a United States Senator, and I voted for him. This Republican appointee, well-respected Supreme Court justice, declared that Judge Kavanaugh's unhinged performance last week demonstrates potential bias. Justice Stevens said that for the good of the court, Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation ought not to proceed. Just yesterday, contrary to the statements made on the floor of the Senate, the American Bar Association announced that it's reopening its evaluation of Judge Kavanaugh's fitness to serve as a judge. These developments, both unprecedented, should serve as a flashing red warning sign to any senator inclined to vote yes at this time. And there are more flashing red signs. Dr. Ford's credible and compelling testimony captivated the nation, inspired survivors of sexual violence across the country.
Captivated the nation.
Every minute of her testimony was credible. She disclosed the abuse long before Judge Kavanaugh was a household name. She remembered vivid details of that night. She expressed 100% certainty that Judge Kavanaugh was her abuser. In a moment that I'll never forget, when I asked her, "Doctor, what is your strongest memory?" Something from the incident she could not forget. She testified, indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two as a teenage Brett Kavanaugh and a friend drunkenly assaulted Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford had nothing to gain by coming forward. I believe her just as I believed Anita Hill. In my view, no one who truly believes Dr. Ford can credibly justify voting yes. Unfortunately, the Senate appears to be on the brink of failing Dr. Ford, just as it will fail Ms. Ramirez, and just as it failed Anita Hill. The FBI investigation completed over the last few days falls short of any standard. And it fell short by design. We've already heard about the deficiencies from Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and numerous other witnesses who attempted unsuccessfully to share relevant information with the FBI. But the FBI were told by the Senate Republican leadership in the White House that this should not be a full investigation. The Senate Republican leadership in the White House did everything in their power to ensure that this investigation was not a search for truth, but rather a search for cover. Even a basic search for the truth would have allowed the FBI to interview Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford, as well as her husband and her therapist. A search for truth would have allowed the FBI to interview numerous high school and college classmates who come forward saying they could provide information about Judge Kavanaugh's conduct during those years that was consistent with the allegations. A search for the truth would have allowed the FBI to interview a man who wrote a sworn statement asserting that he could corroborate Ms. Ramirez's allegations, or two women who contacted authorities with evidence that Judge Kavanaugh tried to head off Ms. Ramirez's story before it became public. That was in clear contradiction with his testimony before the Judiciary Committee. A search for the truth would have allowed the FBI to at least speak with Julie Swetnick, a third accuser. As Vermonters said to me last weekend when I was home, if they have nothing to hide, why the rush? They have nothing to hide, why don't they take the time to find the whole truth? But instead of calling on the FBI to take these basic investigatory steps, inexplicably, the Republican-controlled Judiciary Committee has solely tried to discredit these women. The committee released a statement from a former acquaintance of Ms. Swetnick. This individual had no knowledge of the alleged incident, but instead wanted to describe the alleged sexual preferences of Ms. Swetnick. According to the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, one of the most nonpartisan and respected
Sure,
voices
these people are going to give
Hill,
us a really great statistic.
shameless
totally
attempt to
not
smear a
biased.
victim violates the intent of the Rape Shield law. Look what happened. On the one hand, you have the President of the United States at a rally trying to shame the victim, who of course is a woman. And then we have, on the other hand, Ms. Swetnick was never even interviewed by the FBI. She was ignored, she was silenced. And then, to follow the routine of this administration, she was shamed. It's outrageous she's been treated that way. Republicans have also claimed that the other individuals Dr. Ford identified at the gathering where she was assaulted have refuted her testimony. These Republicans know that's just false. Those individuals stated publicly they do not recall the event. As Dr. Ford told the Judiciary Committee, this is not surprising. It's a very unremarkable party, because nothing remarkable happened to them that evening. But one of these individuals has said publicly she believes Dr. Ford. Republicans have claimed the investigation failed to reveal corroborating evidence for any of these allegations. But despite the numerous restrictions placed on this investigation, that simply is not true. But a predicate fact for developing thorough corroborating evidence is a thorough investigation. And this investigation fell far short. When I was a prosecutor, I never would have allowed an investigation left out so many salient points. It's a disservice to Dr. Ford, to Ms. Ramirez, to Ms.
Salient points, not salient.
But it's a
points.
disservice to survivors everywhere. The manic rush to place Judge Kavanaugh on the bench was more important to many in the Senate than these women. pushing toward confirmation while so many leads remain unexamined is forever going to taint Justice Kavanaugh and, unfortunately, the Supreme Court itself. Yes, truth can be dogged. It has a way of coming out eventually. And for any senator who votes yes, while troubling new developments in this nominee are occurring in real time, it's going to be on their conscience when more disqualifying information later emerges, and it will. I urge them to think carefully about what a yes vote would mean to the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, to the integrity of the Senate, to the increasing divisiveness in our nation. As partisan as this process has been, this is not a partisan dilemma. Many prominent conservatives would make a fine Supreme Court justice. And as I said at the beginning of my speech, I've voted for more Republican nominees than almost any Republican senator in this body. But these other people would not cast a shadow over the Supreme Court and a shadow over the United States Senate along with it. Judge Kavanaugh is not that choice. To avoid risking permanent damage to the integrity of our institutions of government, I urge senators, join me in voting no on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President?
The senator for Pennsylvania.
That was painful.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm going to go for a
President.
little bit longer and then I got to quit.
We come together today to talk about a critical nomination to the United States Supreme Court at a time when the court will be considering a range of issues that are critically important to the American people. Right now, one of the issues that a lot of Americans are most concerned about is the issue of health care. So many aspects to that issue that we can examine today. I'll get to larger overriding concerns I have with the nomination in a moment, but for now, what I'll do is walk through some concerns I have when it comes to health care itself, and in particular, Americans with disabilities. Because I think this part of the debate, and this part of Judge Kavanaugh's record, and the potential impact
Kavanaugh's
of his decisions
ableist now
as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court could have on health care itself and people with disabilities. This whole part of his record and what might happen has been maybe not unexamined, but not examined enough in this debate. I'll start with health care. If Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed today, he could be the deciding vote in eliminating key health care protections for people with pre-existing conditions, an action that would have serious repercussions on the health care of millions of Americans. This administration and congressional Republicans have been trying for the better part of the last 2 years to rip away health care coverage from the people who need it the most across America. Republicans in both branches of government, the executive branch and the legislative branch, have attempted to decimate Medicaid, and although they've been unable so far to fully repeal the Affordable Care Act here in Congress, the Republicans have turned to the courts to sabotage the health care system and the Affordable Care Act. And by the way, while we're mentioning the Medicaid program, let's remind the American people what that program is. The Medicaid program is not a them program, it's an us program. It's about us, who we are as Americans, whether or not we're going to take care of the family of America. And I think my home state is representative of the impact that Medicaid has on people across the country. 40% of the children in Pennsylvania get their health care through the Medicaid program. 50% of the people with disabilities in Pennsylvania rely upon Medicaid. And 60% of seniors trying to get into a nursing home for long-term care in the twilight of their lives rely upon the Medicaid program. 40% of the kids, 50% of people with disabilities, and 60% of seniors rely upon this program. Some 70 million Americans. So the decisions by this Congress or this body and the entire legislative branch are critically important on Medicaid and health care. Obviously the decisions of the executive branch, but now we have to focus as well on the judicial branch, especially with a nomination that could tip the balance in 5-4 decisions.
Balance of
Judge
power,
Kavanaugh has
the thing that you want?
Twice disagreed with rulings upholding the Affordable Care Act. It's no coincidence he's been nominated by this president, by this administration. President Trump apparently believes he can count on Justice Kavanaugh, were he to be confirmed, to rule against the Affordable Care Act when he is on the Supreme Court, if he were to be confirmed today. And you don't take my word for this. A former law clerk of Judge Kavanaugh said it best when she spoke about Judge Kavanaugh's view of the Affordable Care Act. Quote, this is from a law clerk, "No other contender on President Trump's list is on record so vigorously opposing the law," unquote. The law meaning the Affordable Care Act that brought health care to 20 million Americans, about more than half of them because we expanded Medicaid. Right now, courts are considering whether people with pre-existing conditions should continue to be protected from being charged more, from being denied coverage, or being dropped from their insurance simply because of their health status. Who would ever believe that after putting into law, enacting into law those protections for 130 million Americans, who would ever believe we'd still be debating it? That an entire political party would be in a court of law arguing that those protections are unconstitutional. It's an insult to who we are as Americans. In Texas versus the United States, the administration has sided with 20 Republican state attorneys general and is refusing to defend the Affordable Care Act's protections for people with pre-existing conditions. So what's at stake in this legal battle that could end up, obviously, down the road in the Supreme Court? It is 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions. And that means people with diabetes or cancer or anything else that's a pre-existing condition could have their lives grossly, adversely impacted. The Supreme Court might be the last line of defense to maintaining those protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And a Justice Kavanaugh could be the deciding vote to rip away protections which are in law now, right now, and they could be taken away. If Republicans were to win this fight, coverage for millions of Americans who have these protections would be adversely impacted. That's probably an understatement. We also have to be concerned about the fundamentals of our health insurance system, the fundamental stability of our healthcare system, which could be undermined or worse. Such a decision by the Supreme Court would have real-life consequences. In Pennsylvania alone, 5.3 million people, including 643,000 children have a pre-existing condition. I'll tell you the story of one of those children, Jackson Corbin, 13 years old, Hanover, Pennsylvania. He lives with his mother, Anna, his father, Michael, and his brother, Henry. Jackson, Henry, and their mom all have Noonan syndrome, a congenital disability that often involves heart attacks, bleeding problems, possible developmental delays, short stature, and malformation of the rib cage. All of that in the life of one child. Jackson's most troubling concern is a form of hemophilia called von Willebrand disease. And because of this disease, he has to be very careful not to cut himself or to do things that might cause internal bleeding. This means that Jackson cannot play sports, he cannot roller skate, or even jump on a trampoline. The cost of his health care, including medications and treatments and specialists, is more than what his parents would make in a year. In a year. Without health insurance coverage that they are able to purchase through the Affordable Care Act, including protections for pre-existing conditions, the Corbin family would either go bankrupt or Jackson and his mother and his brother would have to go without treatment, of course, risking their lives. Last month, Jackson testified in front of the Judiciary Committee and spoke about what Judge Kavanaugh's nomination meant for him, for Jackson Corbin. Quote, "My Noonan syndrome is part of who I am. It's been a part of me since the day I was born and will be a part of me for the rest of my life. If you destroy protections for pre-existing conditions, you will leave me and all the kids and adults like me without care and without the ability to afford our care, all because of who we are," unquote. Let me repeat those last few words of Jackson Corbin, 13 years old. Quote, "Without care or without the ability to afford our care," unquote. That's what we're talking about here. Judge Kavanaugh could very well be the deciding vote in determining the future of this child and the future of members of his family. All of us, everybody in this building today, are just one illness. Each of us is just one injury away from having our own pre-existing condition, if we don't have one already. Maybe senators and judges and justices don't have to worry about protection for pre-existing conditions. Maybe they can all buy that protection one way or another. But 130 million Americans have to worry, and have to worry about this consequential nomination on an issue of such grave importance as health care itself, and maybe most especially protections for people with pre-existing conditions. How about disabilities? Judge Kavanaugh's record on the rights of individuals with disabilities is troubling as well. I'll give you one example. Liz Weintraub, who, like Jackson, testified in front of the Judiciary Committee in opposition to Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. I know Liz Weintraub well. She's 51 years old. She's from Rockville, Maryland. She has cerebral palsy and an intellectual disability. She has had 2 loving parents and 3 loving sisters. And for 4 months this year, she was on my staff as a legislative fellow. So I'm not objective when it comes to Liz Weintraub. But here's what she told us. And the work she did, of course, on our...
All right, I'm going to stop here. I've gone for a little over an hour, and I got other stuff I got to do, and this bald guy's boring. So I'm going to close out the stream. Thanks for hanging out. I guess I'll have to change the title. I was going to talk about something else, but then this thing happened, and I thought, you know, we can do this. So thanks for coming on. I still have a ways to go on this. Let me know what you think about where I'm at so far. I've already saved. This is going to be my profile pic for social media once I'm done with it, as sort of a way to cross-promote Bombshell, while, you know, with and branding it like with who I am. So thanks again for coming on the stream. Hopefully this trash fire ends with a... I want a confirmation. I don't even know what everything that Brett Kavanaugh stands for, but I want a confirmation, because if he's not confirmed to the Supreme Court, that means that's basically letting everyone know that you can use women to do whatever you want. Use the women's victimhood to get whatever power you want. What he stands for and what he believes, that's irrelevant to this. It's about they're using the accusation to disqualify him. And that's what we need to fight back against. So Doge need a dog tag in form of a bombshell bomb. I don't know, I might add that. I don't know if it's necessary though, but okay. So anyway, thanks for coming on the stream today. I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time. Have a good Saturday, everybody. We'll talk to you later.
In this case, and said that the District of Columbia had to attempt to determine